I was born in 1942, which was the time where first bombing raids hit Munich, and the house next to where we lived was a full hit, and where we lived was partially destroyed. And my mother was only 2 weeks old. I was a newly born baby, and she found me in my cradle with more than a foot of glass shards and bricks and debris on me, but I was completely unhurt. But my mother got so scared that she fled in the mountains, and that's where we got stuck for the next 11 years. So, which was a wonderful childhood. I couldn't have been better, but of course we had no toys, we were hungry, we were starving for 2.5 years. And it was an unusual childhood because, for example, I didn't know that cinema even existed until I was 11. And I made my first phone call when I was 17. Until today, by the way, I refuse to have a cell phone. I'm the only thinking person that I know who doesn't have a cell phone. I don't want to be available all the time. I want to have a quiet moment for myself where people do not reach me. I want silence sometimes. Probably, but even, let's say, even if I hadn't grown up the way I grew up, I probably wouldn't like to have a cell phone on me either. It has a lot of different strata of meaning and availability and whatever. It has to do with a very shallow form of life and communication. And when you look at old poetry from the Tang period in China, 9th century, 8th century, 9th century, and you read a poem about someone who visited a friend who is a monk in a monastery somewhere in the mountains, and he departs, the departure, and he leaves on the Yellow River, and 11 years later he returns. And this encounter with his friend, who has no knowledge of whether he is still alive or not, meets him. All of a sudden an encounter has so much more substance. But when you are returning by plane, you call on your cell phone, well, I'm at immigration right now, and you have made 10 phone calls before, yes, I'm going to be on that airplane, and I'm whatever, you exchange things, and all of a sudden the encounter with your wife doesn't have the depth and significance and the human impact anymore as it could be and used to be. So I prefer to meet my wife without having this permanent contact over a cell phone. The answer is not a simple one. In technical terms, it is easier to make films nowadays because the instruments of making movies are more accessible and much more inexpensive. I had to steal a 35mm camera because nobody would give it to me. So I stole a 35mm camera, and you had to buy raw stock, and you had to pay for the laboratory, and editing was much clumsier and more time consuming and so on. Today you can make a feature film for less than $10,000. And I run my own film school, the Rogue Film School, and I tell everyone, you are not gonna complain to me ever. I'm not in this culture of complaint. Today you can make a film for $10,000, work as a guard in a lunatic asylum, work as a bouncer in a sex club, go out where there's real life and earn the money, and then you make your film. So making a film, yes, has become easier than ever before, and there's no complaint. You just go out, there's no excuse. You take a camera, go out and do it. However, distribution has become more complex, and financing of films, when I do a feature film, financing has become more difficult than before, because I think it is easier to finance a $100 million project with a studio system, but with a project within the system, than doing a $5 million project or $2 million project. Because the audiences have shifted considerably away from what we used to see decades ago, the art house films and French Nouvelle Vague or whatever, the Brazilian films. The audience doesn't exist anymore. I'm aware that there's a shift in the kind of attention of audiences. I'm out for new alliances with distribution systems. I think a filmmaker can only survive if he or she is aware of the marketability of a film. If you are aware how audiences have shifted.
Right.
Of course, I never know exactly who they are, but in case of Into the Abyss, I always knew this was the most intense film I ever did. And it was very beautiful to see that in Toronto at the festival, in a theater of 1,200 seats. Audiences is completely focused in what they are seeing. Nobody seems to be even breathing. So I instinctively know, yes, I have reached an audience. Yes, and Cave of Forgotten Dreams, even wilder. You see, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, and speaking of the American market,
right.
It's a French cave, 32,000 years back in time, about art made by a Bavarian filmmaker who speaks in his commentary in his accent.
Right.
And all of a sudden, and I knew there was something, I would strike a chord, because it has to do with the deepest recesses of our own existence. It has to do with the awakening of the modern human soul. And all of a sudden it catches on, and I think we are well over $5 million domestic theatrical results, which nobody, and I knew it would work. And Grizzly Man, the moment I stumbled into the story, or the story rather stumbled into me, I knew this is big. This is big, and I have to do it. All my films have some funny side, some humor in it. Of course, a very dark, very subversive humor, quite often. But it's in my nature. It's very strange, because over many years there's a general feeling out there, or at least in the media, yeah, there's this Teutonic, grim sort of filmmaker there. Not so. You idiots, haven't you ever seen the humor in all my films?
Yes.
So, and all of a sudden, the humor comes across to audiences. And as grim as Grizzly Man might be, there are very, very funny, strange, subversive moments of humor in it. It was the only way to do it. And it became clear to me once I was allowed for 1 hour into the cave, because I wanted to assess the technical problems, and because I knew I was only allowed 3 persons with me. I was allowed only 1 week of shooting, but only 4 hours per day. No support from outside. And you have to imagine you're moving along a 60 centimeter wide walkway, a metal walkway. So no other choice. You cannot put the camera anywhere, because right next to you, beyond this metal walkway, there are tracks of cave bears. Almost fresh looking tracks. Wow. However, the cave bear is a species, became extinct 20,000 years ago. Amazing. So you cannot step down and plant the camera on the footsteps. Yeah, but I work fast. For example, Grizzly Man was edited in 9 days. A feature film like Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans with Nicolas Cage. Of course I did some editing, some little assembly, steering, shooting, because I knew I had to be on another project only very briefly afterwards. So I delivered the final cut of the film a fortnight after I was done shooting of a feature film, a big feature film. Then I did another feature film back to back with it, where I was also doing some assembly, steering, shooting. I delivered that other feature film, My Son, What Have Ye Done? I delivered it 5 days after I was done shooting. There was something like 2.5 months of editing, but at that time it was celluloid, and it's much slower. Editing digitally, I can edit almost as fast as I'm thinking. Of course, there is a process, and you have to type in and you have to glue pieces together, but it goes much, much faster. So I can edit a film much, much, much faster than ever before. No, they will not disappear, because I'm still around and quite a few others are still around, and there's a justification to these franchise films because audiences want it. So there's a very solid basis within the audiences worldwide. They want to see the next James Bond, they want to see the next Harry Potter or whatever. So there's nothing wrong about franchise films because there's a clear demand out there. Otherwise, what is remarkable is that these franchise films are very much based on star quality or star value and digital effects. And what is somehow overlooked is the power of a story, of storytelling. And I'm good at that. And because of that, part of Hollywood is looking at what I'm doing, because they see, yes, finally there's someone out there who is very good in storytelling. So, and storytelling will never disappear from theaters or television or internet or whatever. It's a gift that we have since time immemorial. I'm sure that Cro-Magnon man in Paleolithic times, 30,000 years ago, they were sitting around the campfire and they would tell stories to each other. And it's a phenomenal gift of humanness. And I'm right dead center in it. People who think I'm marginal, now I have to explain I'm not marginal, I'm dead center. All the rest is marginal. And I'm not.